I'm Queen of the Place to Be Reviews. I'm here with all of yous, and today we're going to talk about the show Lost. That's right, May 23rd, 2010, this show ended, and myself and my brother Salvador are huge Lost fans. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to put together kind of our thoughts, our favorite characters, situations, and just an overall kind of retrospective of 10 years since Lost has gone off the air. Is it still relevant? Nobody really talks about it, you know, and Sal and I both concurred that the way this was built up, it was almost going to be like the Star Wars of television. Could it carry that weight? It had a great ensemble cast, people you knew, didn't know, and were about to meet. But let's get into this video. I'm going to let Sal take it away first, and I'll join in later.
But this place is different. It's special.
We have to go back!
Hello, this is Salvador, and this is my segment on Untitled Place to Be Reviews, celebration of the 10th anniversary of Lost. As some of you may know, if you're Lost fans, the series finale aired on May 23rd, 2010. So, for me, Lost was one of the first shows that I can remember outside of, you know, animated shows as a kid, like Dragon Ball Z or X-Men, Spider-Man, things like that, where I actively watched it every week. That is to say, when it first started airing, I believe it was in 2004, that I would catch it and I would watch it. I kind of fell off the show for a little while. Post-season, I'd say probably partway through season 3, I had some other changes occur in my life and I wasn't able to watch it religiously like I did. And I ended up catching up on Netflix just in time for the 6th season to air. And it's been one of those shows for me that I've seen it all the way through, probably 4 or 5 times now. It's not a show that I can just select an episode and watch. I start from the beginning, I watch the whole thing. And it's, for a long time, it was a bar by which I judged other shows in terms of writing, character development, story arc. Like, it wasn't so much a Monster of the Week show. It was a continuous, you know, episode to episode continuous story. And to me, I like that a lot more than the Monster of the Week concept. I'll quickly list off my favorite characters, of course, Hurley, who's everybody's favorite. But I like Ben, Richard, and Desmond. Those are my 4 favorite characters. All 4 of them had very different stories, very different backgrounds and characteristics. And then they each had something I enjoyed, like Richard, you know, having come over on the Spanish galleon, you know, and being basically a Time Lord, so to speak, because he doesn't age. Ben having this crazy story from starting out as the, you know, the hot air balloon guy who got, was it something Gale, Mr. Gale, getting stuck on the island, and then discovering he was the leader of the others, and, you know, his involvement with Dharma Initiative, and how he first came to the island. Like, it's crazy. Desmond, him and Penny. Before I fall too far down that rabbit hole, I'm just going to move on to my next topic, because we'll be here all day if I start talking about characters and stories.
And before Sal goes any farther, I'm going to talk about my favorite characters for a minute, because this cast was so rich and so deep. It was like a roster just overstuffed with great players that you really wanted to see focused on. So it's really hard to narrow it down, but here are my top 4 Lost characters. Now, number 1 and number 2 for me, well, I'm just going to combine them into one. Jacob and the Man in Black, who were the original denizens of the island. They had this dynamic. They were brothers. One killed the other, went to the heart of the island. I mean, it's all there. I don't want to dive too deep down the rabbit hole like Salvador said earlier, but these two really made the story at the beginning of their inclusion, because it really brought to the forefront the mythos of the island, that texture. And that involved John Locke in another storyline, who he would go on to become the Man in Black through sort of the powers of the island, and that led to the statue and us getting to see that, because all we saw was this big foot, and it's a statue of Taweret, and it has such a deep texture to it, and the legend and the mythos. It really made these two characters pop for me. That's why I love them. Number 2 was obviously Sawyer. Josh Holloway's character. He was the bad boy, and I loved him because I could kind of see some of myself in him. He was conflicted at times. He tried to do things for the right reasons. Sometimes it went according to plan. Sometimes it didn't. He and Jack had this rivalry over Kate, all right? And now it really played into the story later on because Kate obviously magnated towards Jack, and Sawyer had finally found his happiness with Juliet, but of course, Kate kept messing it up. And that was like a theme for Sawyer throughout the whole show, and Kate as well, but I loved Sawyer. So number 3 would be John Locke, because he came to the island in a wheelchair, and the island healed him. Locke knew it was special. He knew there was something different about this place. He knew they weren't supposed to leave. But then something happened. We're not going to get too deep into it, but remember, he died back home and came back as...
You? Me.
I am very disappointed in all of you.
Rounding out my top 4 would be Saeed. Such a tragic character. Came to the island, found love with Shannon, had it taken away by Ana Lucia, which Michelle Rodriguez, she's another story altogether in this show, but it was such a tragedy. He lost 2 loves and was just an overall great character. To me, Saeed was a great character because he was so layered and textured. You saw his vicious side, but you also saw him humanized. You saw him be able to be, pardon the expression, but maybe soft and kind of tender towards Shannon and the woman, Nora, that he had helped escape in Iraq. With a cast of characters this deep, it was really, really difficult for me to narrow it down because I do truly love all the characters in one way or another in the show so much just because of how well they were written and how layered they were, the struggles and adversity. But before I go on any further, let me toss it back over to my brother, Salvador.
The thing I find the most interesting about the show, it was just monumental. There was so much going on and people talked about it, but then once it's done, it's done. No one talks, Arntt's finding out that he's actually not a science teacher. Something else, I'm sure it's happened before, but it was kind of the first time that I was aware of having dual showrunners with Carlton Cuse and Damon Lindelof. And, you always think, okay, well, if you have 2 minds thinking about it, then that helps with the show. That helps with the writing, helps with the creativeness. You have ideas to bounce, you have someone to bounce ideas off of. And a lot of people would argue that it didn't work out for them in the end. The final season, especially the series finale, got a lot of backlash from a lot of people because they didn't open all the mystery boxes, they didn't answer all the questions. And someone like me, at the time, I was fine with it. I'm still okay with it because they answered the important questions. Did they answer absolutely everything? No. But not every little thing needed to be answered, I don't think. They answered kind of the big ones. And due to that backlash, on the Season 6 DVD, on the special features, they had an epilogue. It was like an 11-minute, 12-minute episode where they had Benjamin Linus show up at the last remaining Dharma outpost, the people that were sending the pallets of food, and he basically gave them severance checks, and they're like, wait, we have questions. So they were kind of inserting fans into that little thing, and they asked all these questions that people complained weren't answered, and Ben just rattled off a list of answers, and that was it. But, you had to buy the DVD to see that, and I'm sure it's available on YouTube now. I bring that up because Game of Thrones is another TV series that was this worldwide phenomenon, kind of like Lost was, again, run by 2 people, and that final season destroyed that show. So maybe the 2 people concept doesn't really work with shows sometimes. It has the potential, but it's like they run the length of the football field and they fumble at the 5-yard line. Another thing that Lost did was with J.J. Abrams, his involvement in the show, which I believe he left the show after the 4th episode, but no, I didn't know that at the time. There were a ton of Star Wars references, like when Michael and Jin are trying to build the raft to get off the island. You hear Michael leave and go and say, no, that goes there, this goes here. And the fact that there was a language barrier is a nod to Empire Strikes Back with Chewie and Han working on the Millennium Falcon. There's an episode where Hurley, going back in time, is rewriting Empire Strikes Back with spelling errors, and they ask him why, and he goes, dude, Ewoks suck. There's a ton of Star Wars references littered throughout that show, and when I heard that J.J. Abrams had been attached to Episode 7 initially, I was excited because I loved Lost. I got all the references watching the show, and I was like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. He has a love for the show, and then If I'd known then what I know now, the optimism would have, been DOA, especially knowing the result of the new trilogy. It definitely would have been DOA. And something else I feel that really hurt the show, especially in the long run, and people seem to forget this even happened. Various sources will tell you that originally the show was only supposed to be 3 seasons long, and then other sources will tell you that Stephen King made them a bet to end it in 6 seasons. So I feel like the truth is somewhere in the middle of all these. I feel like they initially had a story with a beginning, middle, end, with 3 seasons, kind of like the 3 episodes of Star Wars. And I feel like ABC decided to milk the cash cow and said you need to drag this out as long as you can because it's making a lot of money. It's word of mouth. So they did that. Unfortunately, the writer's strike occurred, and you'll see, looking at episode counts from season 1, 2, and 3, and then going into 4 and 5, that was during the writer's strike. So episode counts were, significantly smaller. Certain episodes were airing out of order, and it really kind of cut the show off at the knees, I think. They weren't ever fully able to recover from that, So I feel like ratings were plummeting because of that, and then ABC said, nope, it's time to pull the plug. You have 1 more season. And that's why season 6 is so off the rails and kind of like a whirlwind sprint to the end, because they had to tie up all the loose ends in 1 season when they thought they were going to have more. And we saw that kind of repeat again in Game of Thrones, and we saw it repeat again with the Disney trilogy. But one of my more favorite things about the show, and this speaks more to the time that it was made and less about the show, I think, really at the core of it, is that we were able to have civil discussion. A lot of my friends in my peer group, we came from different backgrounds, had different beliefs about life, religion, politics, this, that, and the other. But we were able to have a civil discussion about all those topics, and then we used Lost a lot, like time travel. I've always been a big fan about how Lost did time travel. The whole whatever happened, happened. It was kind of, whatever you do in the past has already occurred because we're from the present. I like that whole concept that the life you're living right now, if someone went back in time today and changed something, it wouldn't matter because it's already happened. Because all the events that are set in motion from them going into the past allowed them to go into the past to begin with. It kind of creates a loop or a paradox in a lot of ways. Now, was the show a bit ridiculous at times, like with the island being able to move with a kind of steering wheel, so to speak, at the heart of the island? Yeah. Was it strange that Jack had to basically put a stone cork back into the island to keep it from, releasing evil upon the world? Yeah, it was a little weird. But that was the show. There were a ton of oddball, off-the-wall things, but you gobbled it right up because you cared so much about the characters and what happened to them. All the characters were so wildly different from each other that, you were able to pick a favorite or have favorites, or you were able to at least even, kind of justify why a character was your favorite. Or in a lot of cases, there could be a character that you did not like at all, and by the end of the show, you loved them. For me, like Sawyer, I thought he was a dick and I did not enjoy him. But by the end of the show, I was rooting for him. I really liked Sawyer. Conversely, I liked Kate in the first couple episodes. By the end of the show, I couldn't stand her. I hated that woman so much. And I know that sounds a lot worse than I intended to, but she just couldn't do what the hell she was told. So often, the kind of de facto leaders would tell her, hey, do this, and then she wouldn't. And she'd get herself captured, or she'd ruin the plan somehow, and never once thought that she was in the wrong. Like, she, if I remember correctly, killed her dad, and then still was like, I didn't do it, I'm innocent. And it's like, no, you straight up did. You did. You killed him, and just never saw anything wrong with it.
And I had a huge issue with Kate's character, too, and a lot of the problems in the show rested on her shoulders. Because she just, like Sal said, did whatever she wanted without thinking about the consequences and repercussions. And even though she had one of the nicest sets of shoulders on the show, I do admit, Evangeline Lilly was in phenomenal shape for the show, but I don't want to digress. She just looked out for Kate because that's what she was used to. And the problem with Kate looking out for Kate was the adverse way that it affected everybody around her, be it one of the other survivors on the plane or one of the survivors on the plane who she was romantically linked to throughout the course of the series run. Yes, Jack, Sawyer, she played them both off each other. And the thing that really angered me about Kate was how she ruined Sawyer and Juliet's relationship out of as they said in Picard, sheer hubris, because she couldn't stand to see him with somebody else. Even if she didn't want him, she couldn't stand to see him with somebody else and be happy, I think it was. That was just her modus operandi through the course of the series. Nikki and Paolo, we're going to talk about them briefly because they were one of the most annoying character couplings and most annoying couples in TV history, I'm fairly certain. And their death was very, very, very much celebrated by the fan base, yours included. They're double crossing. She uses a spider to bite him. She gets bit by it. They get thrown in a hole, get buried alive. And I really don't think that anybody missed that couple on the show. Those actors, nothing against them. It was the writing, but my God, they were just beyond annoying. But for me, the concept of time travel on this show, as it was touched on, wasn't really that far removed from reality in the universe of the show, because you had these ancient figures in the show who lived on the island and were kind of playing chess, if you will, with the players or the people on the island, as we should say, between Jacob the Man in Black and Richard. What I really wanted to touch on next, and I'm going to do this in a separate video eventually, is the Dharma Initiative, which, if you notice my logo, is kind of, yeah, it's kind of based on that. Well, it is based on the Dharma Initiative logo, because the hatch was one of the coolest things I had ever seen happen in a television show. And I know you might be thinking, well, what kind of shows are you watching? Well, think about it. It opened up a completely new world, new storyline, new characters. And it was so textured and layered, and they made everything look so retro and cool. I couldn't help but immerse myself in all the stations of the Dharma Initiative when they would focus on a different one around the island. I mean, it didn't get any cooler than, oh, they got, you have to push these buttons or else, the world's going to end, or, oh, well, here's an observation one where they're watching people in another station that don't know they're being watched. And then you come to find out it's all these psychology and almost like psyops stations to monitor one another. And the way they kind of veiled it in this, oh, well, we're just going to go there and do these experiments and everybody's going to live in peace, and it's kind of a communal living type situation, which in many ways it was, but there was so much more at play than just a bunch of people trying to live and work in this utopian type society. I'm not a very sciencey guy, but the properties of magnetism on this island were very fascinating to me, just because the way it affected the plot. And I know it's writing and it's for the sake of story, but man, was it really cool to see things collapse and kind of suck into it themselves in that scene where they had the explosion where Juliet died, which was a heartbreaker. The Dharma Initiative, far and away, was one of my favorite parts of Lost, though, overall, because of the world building that they put into setting this entire civilization, or the initiative up, I call it a civilization, because it basically was a civilization on the island. They were supposed to be, kind of self-sustaining, but they had the submarine, which they would go back to the mainland for supplies in. All the stations, when they featured each of these stations during the course of the show, and you had some of the people left in them, like the Hydra underwater, it was insane to see the amount of work they put into these set pieces. And the actual Dharma Barracks are a YMCA camp in Oahu, Hawaii, which you're seeing right now, which I thought was really cool that they used that and they weren't prefabbed buildings. But they paid attention to detail down to the logos on the food, the Dharma Initiative beer, the logos, the authenticity and the care and love that they put into the time frame that this was set in for the initiative was nothing short of awesome to me, especially the videos.
And that ties back into the discussion that I mentioned previously with my peer group. We would discuss religion, politics, morals, all that through the lens of the show, and no one ever got their feelings hurt. No one ever went crying about it. We just had a discussion and went about our day, and it was great because the show encouraged it almost. There was a lot of symbolism, with the statue or the foot. The Spanish galleon came over and knocked over the statue, which is a bit of a stretch that a wooden ship would demolish a stone statue, but that's neither here nor there. But it encouraged you to go look things up. It didn't treat you like you were dumb. If you knew what it was, like the statue, which I don't remember how to pronounce the name, but I think it was the hippo god of the underworld or something like that. But they would encourage you to go look it up. so you were learning things while you watched the show, and it was put to you in such a way that you wanted to learn, you wanted to know, and that's a mark of a great show to me. And to this day, I can still watch the show and relearn things. Like I'll watch it and I'll remember, oh yeah, I remember looking that up because I didn't know what that was. Like I already mentioned the statue, but like the statue, I didn't know what it was, so I looked it up. I went down a rabbit hole, just looking up all this like Egyptian mythologies and symbolism and the like. And then there's the whole Dharma initiative and what the crane or the looking glass. Like there's all the different names for the stations, and they each have their own individual meanings. The Dharma symbol itself, what the Dharma is. Like there's so much to unpack in that show. I can't recommend it enough. Which brings me to kind of my final topic, I guess, and that's how the show aged. By today's standards, a lot of the special effects are kind of jarring. The CGI then, based on the budget, wasn't so great. Like the Hurley-Bird, for example, looks atrocious. The smoke monster kind of looks bad, or I prefer to believe it's a pissed-off giraffe. A lot of the physical sets were great, like the hatch, the looking glass, things like that. They looked incredible. They found a creative way to bring people to the island, to take people off the island. They found a way to world build to the point where, oh, there's all these different hands in the pot, there's all these different corporations that know about it or trying to find it, and it was this huge balancing act. People often tout that Avengers were the first, was the most ambitious crossover in history. I would tend to give it to Lost. For a lot of the complaints that show receives about, oh, they didn't plan, they didn't do this, they didn't answer all these questions, they sure as hell had a lot of foresight to do things. Like if they wanted to introduce a new character, they didn't just randomly show up. There was a few episodes that build up to it, or if they did show up, there would be a couple of episodes with, exposition here and there to tell you how they got there, or there'd be a flashback sequence. They had flash forwards, flashbacks, then what was called the flash sideways, which was a parallel timeline going on at the same time in the 6th season. And, to have it all end at a church in the final episode, it's just, there's so much to unpack in that show. And some of the technology, we're 10 years removed, 16 years removed from the first episode. So, technology advances, that's just the nature of the game, that happens. But still, if you have the time or a passing interest or anything, go watch Lost, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. I still love that show. I believe, last I checked, it's available on Hulu, so if you subscribe to Hulu, you've got it. It was on Netflix for a while, and it's gone. The show, fantastic. It's top 5 for me. Like I put it in the same wheelhouse as, Breaking Bad, for example. I think the show is fantastic. I guess that's the end of my segment, and I'll pass it on over to Pete.
I'm sorry you had to see me like that.
It seems like I always gravitate back to the history of the island, and nothing was better to me than the setup that they waited until season 6 to give us with Jacob and the Man in Black. Now, could that have been because of the way it was kind of muddled and everything was just kind of a mishmash in the last season? People had issues with it. Me personally, I never did. I really did not. I loved the texture and the layers to the history of the island that they set up even later in the show. Like I said, in the home stretch, season 6, episode 15, they're kind of setting up the history of the island still, which in retrospect really helped you even invest more in that last season, which people seem to have a problem with. And I'm not even going to talk about the series finale because that's a separate video altogether. All I know is that Jacob, the Man in Black, and the mother were very intriguing characters. And if we could have got a spin-off series just based on them and the history of the island without the survivors, I would have been on cloud 9 at that point, because I was just enthralled with it, wanted more. I wanted more of that statue. Like Sal alluded to earlier, the religious iconography in the show was there, but it wasn't in your face or anything that would really offend anybody, because it made you want to learn. It made you want to dig deeper into these things, especially that statue. And seeing the scene inside of it with the smoke monster rampage with John Locke was just so cool. These people were supposed to be coming to protect Jacob, and the Man in Black finally figured out a way to kill him, And it was crazy. The heart of the island being that light. People are like, oh, that's kind of weird. No, it was cool, and it was very symbolic. And I really loved it, man. I had no issues with that whatsoever. Now, what I really loved was the first and last scenes of the series. And what I found so captivating about these scenes was how they were shot in relation to when he first woke up. Right here you can see the trees were kind of closed in, the disorientation, the fear in his eyes, you know, and it was just it's beautiful symbolism of the alpha and the omega of the show, the beginning and the end, because this was Jack's story. No matter how many characters that got involved in the plot, no matter how far away we seemingly strayed from Jack at some points in the story, this was always about him and his beginning, his end, and everything that happened in between, everybody's lives he touched, good or bad or indifferent. It was Jack Shephard's story, and Matthew Fox played that role absolutely perfect. I have enjoyed making this. I'd like to thank Salvador for being part of it. I'm in the middle of watching Lost again right now for the 4th time since it aired originally in 2004, and I truly love this show. And thank you all for joining us, and I'll leave you with this.